Welcome, my dear students, to another week of Biology with Mr. Miguel. This week, we will continue our discussion on the digestive system. More specifically, we will cover the pharynx, the esophagus, and the stomach. The first thing we will do is to describe the structure and the function of the pharynx. The pharynx itself is not a structure. It is more like a region that exists at the back of your nose, at the back of your mouth, and at the back of the larynx. So this is basically what I'm saying. The pharynx is the space that is found right here. This is known as the pharynx. And I want you to imagine this. The pharynx is like the room when you enter your house, maybe the living room. So it's like the living room through where everything needs to pass through. So we know that when you swallow, food passes through the pharynx. When you breathe, it also passes through the pharynx. So various materials that are essential to the body pass through the pharynx. The pharynx itself is divided into three different sections. The first section is the nasopharynx. The word naso means nariz, naso, nasal, naso. So the space that is found at the back, it's in the inside. So towards the posterior area of the nose, of the nasal cavity, would be referred to as the nasopharynx. So we find the nasopharynx being right here. If you notice, air comes in, it needs to pass through the nasopharynx. Then we have the oropharynx. When you hear the word oro, in oropharynx, the word or the prefix oro means, so when we speak about like the oral cavity, we're talking about the mouth. Oro stands for mouth. Then we have the laryngopharynx. And the laryngopharynx is basically on the larynx, at the back of the larynx. We will cover that once we cover the respiratory system in humans. So let us look at the spaces here. So we have the nasopharynx. This is the one at the back, or the space at the back of the nose. We also have the oropharynx, and the oropharynx would be the one at the back of the mouth. This structure is known as the larynx. That's known as the larynx. And the larynx is the voice box. So there is a space behind the larynx that is known as the laryngopharynx. And why is this important? It is important to know because many of the times we get infections in the pharynx. Like you will hear the doctor, you have pharyngitis. What exactly does pharyngitis mean? So you would have an inflammation of the pharynx, which would make your throat feel sore. Our second objective is to describe the anatomy of the esophagus along with its various layers. So let us look at the anatomy of the esophagus. In all aspects of the word, if I were to summarize what the esophagus is basically the tube that connects the mouth with the stomach. It is as simple as that. Or is it? It is actually a little bit more complex than what you may think. So yeah, we know it is a tube that connects the mouth with the stomach. And we also know that it conducts food through the process of peristalsis from the mouth to the stomach. That we will talk about peristalsis in the next few slides. And something that I need to clarify is that the esophagus is not a passageway for air. This means that it's designed strictly for food. So when you look at the esophagus and the pharynx and all of the upper structures, you will notice that from the mouth, when you swallow, it goes into a tube. And it's this tube right there that I'm coloring. So that would be the esophagus. Then there is a specific tube for air, and it is not the esophagus, okay? That would be the trachea. The trachea would be the tube in charge of conducting air. but the esophagus is strictly for food. And if we were to cut this tube, so I want you to imagine this. If you have a rubber hose at home and you cut it, una manguera, and you cut it, you will notice that there are various layers to that manguera. It's not only made out of one material, or is it? It shouldn't, because good hose would have various layers. And the esophagus is the same way. It is made up of different layers. The outermost layer we know as the adventitia, and it would be a very thin layer right here. You can see it on the diagram. The adventitia is this tiny layer here. It also has a layer of muscle, and this layer of muscle is often referred to as the muscularis. And the area of muscle would be this thick area that you're able to see here. So you're able to see that thick layer of muscle on the diagram. It would also have a layer of submucosa, which is this light area here. And it has a tiny layer of mucosa. So that means it would have like a layer of slime, just like your nose has a layer of mucosa. That's when you put in your finger inside of your nose, you will feel sometimes that it's slimy. Inside of the esophagus, we have a layer similar to that of the nose, which we know as the mucosa. And what is the function of these layers? Well, let us start with the adventitia. The first thing you need to know is that the esophagus is not floating in air inside of our bodies. It is at a designated place. It is very steady. It does not change. Like today, you will not find my esophagus on my right lung or on my left lung. Why is this? What keeps the esophagus in place? Well, the structure that keeps the esophagus in place would be the adventitia. And the adventitia is a layer of connective tissue that anchors the esophagus in its place. The next layer would be the muscularis, and it should come as no surprise that the muscle layer of the esophagus is charged with the movement of food. The muscles of the esophagus are able to contract and relax. This means that when food enters the esophagus, it grabs the food, like the little ball of food, and it pushes down the food. It pushes down the food. And that would be like the major function of the esophagus. One thing that I need to make clear is that the esophagus is not this tube that is open at all times. It is actually closed. It is a tube, but it's closed at all times. Es como una llanta que no está inflado. Un tubo que no está inflado. That's how it looks like. The next layer is the submucosa. And someone needs to be producing the mucous layer, right? So the submucosa contains cells that is constantly replenishing the mucous layer. That means once the mucus gets carried away with the food, the submucosa makes more mucus. In addition, the submucosa is filled with nerve endings, nervios, that make us aware of the passage of food throughout our esophagus. And finally, we have the innermost layer, which is the mucosa, which is a layer of slime. And the function of this layer of slime is to allow food to slide right past in the digestive system. So this mucus lubricates, in a sense, the food that is passing through. It also traps microorganisms, but the main function would be lubrication. And those would be the 4 layers of the esophagus. Let us look at the next objective. I told you that we would talk about peristalsis. So what is it? Okay. If I were to summarize what peristalsis is, Peristalsis is a process, that's the first thing you should know, in which the muscles in the digestive system move in a wave-like fashion in order to push down food. That is what peristalsis is. It is a process in which the muscles of the digestive system push down food in a wave-like manner. This means that in peristalsis, the muscles of the esophagus and the muscles throughout the digestive system would be doing this, see? In wave-like fashion, trying to push down the food. Something that I need to make abundantly clear for you is that when you swallow food, it is swallowed in the form of a little ball, una bola. And in science, we refer to this little ball of food as a bolus. So the bolus gets pushed down from the mouth up to the stomach. Let's move into our final two objectives, and that is to look at the stomach. When we say, and I've heard many of you say, me duele el estómago, my stomach hurts, are you referring to your abdomen or are you referring to the organ that is found on the left-hand side of the abdomen? When we talk about the stomach, we're talking about that bean-like or bean-looking structure that is located on the left-hand side of the abdominal cavity. When food comes from the esophagus, it enters the stomach through the cardioesophageal sphincter. And it is very important that we talk about sphincters right now. Sphincters are little muscles that allow you to squeeze, whether consciously or subconsciously, squeeze the tubes. For example, when you really want to go to the restroom to defecate, what happens? Sometimes the restroom is not close at hand. Let's say that you're traveling and you really want to go to the bathroom. What do? You squeeze the muscle on the anus. And by squeezing the muscle of the anus, you prevent the feces from coming out automatically. This muscle that you are squeezing is known as the sphincter. And sphincter muscles are found throughout the body. Here, at the entrance of the stomach, we can find a sphincter. And the name of that sphincter is the cardioesophageal sphincter. What this does is that once the food enters the stomach, it prevents the food from just coming back up into your mouth. So the sphincter squeezes tightly in order to prevent food from exiting the stomach through the mouth. We also know that the stomach produces a lot of hydrochloric acid. The entire function of this acid is so that the enzyme pepsin can work. Pepsin can only work in an environment that is highly acidic. So in order for the pepsin to be able to work, it needs an acidic environment, and the stomach is acidic. It contains an acid which is very strong that is known as hydrochloric acid. I want to clarify that the function of the hydrochloric acid is not to break down the food. It is to enable pepsin to work. And there are various structures that I need you to remember when we refer to as the stomach. Yes, the stomach is one organ, but this organ contains various structures. Of the structures that I need you to remember from the bottom of my heart, we need to eliminate these. So you don't need to remember these two structures for now. The first structure that I need you to remember is the cardiac region. And the cardiac region is known as the cardiac region because it is a structure that is most closely to the heart. Cardio, heart, cardia, structure near the heart. So the entrance of the stomach would be the cardiac region. Now, if we move on to the next side, or towards the exit of the stomach, the exit would be known as the pylorus. Once the food empties, passes through the pyloric sphincter, because there is a sphincter there, it enters the small intestine. The final observation that I need you to make is that the stomach has arrugas like the ones that you have on your forehead. And those arrugas, we normally refer to those arrugas as the rugae or arrugae. So if you notice, the arrugas or the wrinkles that are found on the walls of the stomach is known as the rugae. And those would be the major parts of the stomach that I would need you to remember. So what are the functions of the stomach? The first one is that once food enters the stomach, it is stored there for a little while, 2 hours, 3 hours. So in a sense, the stomach serves as a storage tank for food. Yeah, you get it. Food is stored there for some time. It is also the structure that passes on the food to the small intestine. So the function is to pass food to the small intestine. And these two are related. And the stomach is the site where chemical breakdown of proteins occur. This means that proteins start being broken down in the stomach through the enzyme pepsin. The final function of the stomach, which is not written here, would be the following. It aids in the production of vitamin B12. It is also known as the intrinsic factor. Now, hear me out. Have you ever heard of someone getting anemia, meaning, tiene baja la sangre? Have you heard of something like that? Sometimes people with gastritis end up with anemia, and it blows my head. Boof. How is this possible? How are they related? Well, the production of vitamin B12 commences at the stomach. What is the function of vitamin B12? The function of vitamin B12 is for the absorption of iron. Iron? Yes, iron, hierro. And iron is used to produce hemoglobin. And hemoglobin are the little pigments that go in red blood cells. And the red blood cells are part of the blood. Now, when vitamin B12 is absent, sometimes because you have gastritis, sometimes because you have ulcers, iron cannot be absorbed by the body. And if iron cannot be absorbed by the body, hemoglobin cannot be produced. If the hemoglobin cannot be produced, that means that your blood is low. Yes. Finally, we know that the stomach is the site where chemical breakdown of protein starts. There is an enzyme that I will keep repeating until you remember. It's known as pepsin. Hydrochloric acid does not break down the food. I need to repeat this a couple of times. Hydrochloric acid does not break down the food. It provides an environment for pepsin, which is the actual protagonist of the story in the stomach, to break down the protein. Now here is a really interesting thing that you need to think about. What happens when you do not eat at your proper times? Mister, will you start suffering from gastritis? That is obvious. But why? Why exactly? Oh, because the acid hurts your stomach. Not really. The thing that will hurt your stomach would be the pepsin. If there is no protein entering into your stomach, the pepsin will digest the nearest protein, and the nearest protein would be your stomach. The mucosa, yeah, I'm gonna digest the mucosa. And it's also gonna digest the submucosa until it damages and causes an inflammation that we know as gastritis. We know that the hydrochloric acid is able to kill microorganisms, but that wouldn't be like the major function. That would be one of the side functions. And that would be it for today. Next week, we will cover enzymes in detail. So please be ready. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a blessed day.